Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Yes, You Can Work, Maximizing Income Through Competitive Employment. My name is Pam Hine. I'm a Senior Project Associate here at the SAMHSA SOAR TA Center, and I'll be your moderator today. Just a quick disclaimer, the views, opinions, and content expressed in the presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Before I begin, just a few preliminary items to review. So all of the slides, materials, and presenter bios will be available in the chat, also on the SOAR website and in the reminder emails that you received. And we'll also send a link after the webinar as well. And a recording will be available within 1 week at the above link and also on YouTube. So all participant lines will be muted and the chat function is disabled. And please submit questions using the Q&A feature. At the end of the webinar, we do have time for facilitated Q&A. And for accessibility, we're so proud to have ASL interpretation from Abby and Michelle and live captioning from Lenora. So that's being provided for you today. To show the captions, you can just click the CC icon. And an evaluation, so at the end of the webinar, your browser will redirect you to a survey following the webinar that we kindly ask you to complete. And you also have an opportunity to post some questions within the evaluation itself. So today we're lucky to have Doreen Gross, who is the project coordinator and our SOAR core with the Division of State and Community Systems Development at the Center for Mental Health Services at SAMHSA. Doreen will give our welcome today. Doreen?
Thank you, Pam, and a warm welcome to all of you for joining us today. On behalf of SAMHSA, which actually stands for Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, I welcome you to this webinar, SOAR webinar titled, Yes, You Can Work, Maximizing Income Through Competitive Employment. When SSI and SSDI benefits began, lifelong employment goals do not end. Illness may interfere with the ability to maintain employment, but this may not be permanent. In the spirit of SOAR as a stepping stone to recovery, people who receive SSI and SSDI should be encouraged to seek competitive employment and employment services throughout the application process and after benefits are obtained. The panelists on today's webinar will share their expertise on how SOAR providers can help applicants maintain hope that employment is possible and worth the effort. I would like to welcome and thank our panelists for your willingness to share your expertise on this important topic. I'll turn it back over to Pam Hine, who will be moderating today's session.
Thanks, Doreen, so much for those powerful words. So it's our intention that by the end of the webinar today, you'll learn about the facts about competitive work opportunities and those supports available for individuals with disabilities and know how to access those supports within your communities and utilizing the tools that the SAMHSA SOAR TA Center has created and other entities that you'll hear about today to really assist SSI and SSDI beneficiaries with competitive work. So to help us reach those objectives, we're fortunate to have Kristen Lupfer, who's the project director at the SAMHSA SOAR TA Center and vice president at PRA. We have Raven Sabula, who's the project director with the ILR Yang Tan Institute on Employment and Disability Work Incentive Support Center at Cornell University, who is just the ultimate subject matter expert in this area. We're also so lucky to have Caroline Bolus, who's the former state lead of Maryland, who's currently the small business specialist with the National Disability Institute in Washington, D.C., to share about competitive work and how folks can be entrepreneurs through gig work and other employment opportunities. And then giving our SOAR provider perspective, we have Nancy Bunn, who's a social worker and case manager with Search Homeless Services in Houston, will share how she she talks about work with SOAR beneficiaries as well. And then we are so lucky to have Nina Massey, who is an entrepreneur, performance artist out of Denver, Colorado, and an SSDI beneficiary who will share how she is working as an entrepreneur. So we'll share with us about how her journey in this area as well. Then, of course, we do have time for Q&A. So now we will begin with Kristen, who will lay the foundation and share some of the tools from the SAMHSA Tour CA Center. Kristen?
Thank you, Pam, and hello, everyone. Like Pam said, my name is Kristen Lupfer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the project director of the SOAR TA Center here at Policy Research Associates. I am so excited that you all have joined us for today's webinar. I'm really passionate about employment for people with disabilities. My first job out of college was as a job coach, or better known now as a supported employment specialist. And I've spent decades since then working on increasing access to disability benefits, but never forgot about the importance and the power of employment. I know that the joy and fulfillment that I get out of my work reminds me of how work, in whatever form that takes, is essential to all of us. So we know that earnings from work may affect mainstream benefits, but it shouldn't be a deterrent from helping someone to pursue their employment goals. So that's why we're here today to talk about work and increasing income. The good news is that potential decreases in mainstream benefits are really often offset by those increases in earned income, as well as all of the other important outcomes like social connection and self-esteem. We want to promote and reassure that employment is possible and encouraged while applying for and receiving disability benefits. Really, to achieve the goals of wellness, recovery, and resiliency, we need to start with a strong foundation, and that foundation can be laid with bricks of steady income. We need employment and education and health insurance to provide stabilizing bricks in that foundation. And so income's just the beginning, and income maximization really builds the strongest foundation. With that foundation brings access to healthcare and housing and increased access to treatment support services, which ultimately leads to a decrease in incarcerations, institutionalization, and hospitalizations. We don't like to repeat myths because our brains are tricky, and hearing the myths repeatedly can really cement them even further in our memories. So we're going to state the facts here. So it is a fact that individuals with behavioral health conditions do want to work. In fact, work can help improve symptoms and quality of life for individuals with mental illness. It is a fact that individuals can work while receiving Social Security disability benefits. Social Security has generous work incentive programs to help encourage work and maintain benefits while working. And it's a fact that it's possible to combine income from the VA, SSA, and employment depending on the benefits received and amount of work. And we'll show you how this works in just a few minutes. All right, so while applying for SSI and SSDI, it's important to help spread the message that applicants can work during the SSI and SSDI application process. This myth prevents many people from working to their ability and receiving income to meet their most basic needs. Employment can actually help strengthen the application, as the applicant's employer can provide details and examples about any job accommodations or supports the applicant receives. And I know Nancy's going to talk more about this in practice, but maybe someone's receiving longer breaks or a different work schedule. They can also help document any limitations that the applicant may be having due to their disabling conditions. Alternatively, encouraging employment may help an individual to find employment that fits their strengths and interests, helps provide any needed supports they have. And in this way, an applicant might find a job that enables them to earn over SGA, which is really a great thing. It's important to reassure the applicant that if the employment ends or their condition worsens, that SOAR is always here to help. If the applicant is currently working, or if they've engaged in work activities since their alleged onset date, which is that date that we provide on the application, then SSA might request that they complete an SSA 821 work activity report, and we've got a helpful article on the SOAR Works website with tips on completing that form. After an individual is approved for SSI or SSDI, SSA will begin to send them information about the ticket to work and encourage them to try working. And this can be confusing to applicants, as it might appear that SSA, is trying to take away their disability benefits. So that's why it's important for SOAR providers to talk openly and often about the great work incentives from SSA. And Ray will talk more about this when he joins the webinar, but the Choose Work SSA website really has some fantastic resources to support beneficiaries in learning how income will impact their disability benefits. There are also fantastic programs across the country who use the individual placement and support, or IPS model of supported employment, which helps individuals obtain competitive employment and pursue their vocational goals. So we've got a number of great resources about IPS on the SOAR Works website as well. So the big question, what will happen to cash benefits when you go back to work? Let's start with SSI. Because SSI is a needs-based program, an individual's check will likely reduce when they start working. But SSA applies some exclusion and then only counts $1 for every $2 earned from employment. There's a general income exclusion where SSA excludes the first $20. There's an earned income exclusion where they exclude the first $65 a person earns from working. There's what they call a plan to achieve self-support, where an SSI recipient can save money for an educational or vocational goal in a separate account, and it's not counted as a resource or countable income when determining the SSI payment. There are impairment-related work expenses that apply to both programs, which are out-of-pocket expenses that enable someone to go to work. The work incentives are different for SSDI because SSDI is the program you pay into when you have worked, and the benefit amount is based on your past earnings. So because of this, SSI has work incentives that are encouraging individuals to try working again because they have worked in the past. So the trial work period includes 9 months in a rolling 5-year period during which a person can work as much as they're able and keep their full SSDI check. After the trial work period, there's an extended period of eligibility, which is this 3-year safety net period during which any month the person isn't able to earn over that SGA amount, they can again receive their full SSDI check. There are other work incentive programs. We can't get into all of the details, but there's a lot of ways that we can calculate extra support that an employer is providing, such as that support of a job coach, and showing reduced workload for individuals with disabilities to help reduce countable income and help keep benefit payments continuing. The health insurance benefit is often as valuable to an individual as the cash payments, so it's really important to know what will happen to Medicaid and Medicare when a person goes to work. SSI recipients will continue to be eligible for Medicaid as long as they receive any SSI, even if it's only $1. And then with Federal Rule 1619B, Medicaid will continue even if those SSI payments stop due to earnings from work, so long as those earnings are below a certain state threshold. And some of those state thresholds are fairly generous. SSDI recipients who are receiving Medicare are eligible for Medicare as long as they're receiving a benefit payment. If those payments do stop after the trial work period, Medicare coverage will continue for 93 months after that last month of the trial work period. And then after that, it can be purchased under certain conditions, and just Part A premiums would apply at that point. All right, so that was just a very quick, very high-level overview of work incentives. So some resources for you. The Red Book is SSA's Guide to Work Incentives. It is an excellent resource for additional definitions and explanations for what I just quickly reviewed. The SOAR brief overview of work incentives goes into more depth than I covered today and can be a quick reference or reminder of the basics, and then you dig in deeper with the Red Book. So this income and benefits calculator is a resource on our website. It's really a fancy spreadsheet, and it was designed to encourage individuals to utilize SSA work incentives to maximize their income. So it has separate calculators for SSI and SSDI beneficiaries and provides both a visual and a calculated representation of how increasing income from employment or other benefits will affect overall income. So the bottom line here is that work pays. So even if the benefit payment is reduced, the increased earned income will bring the total income above the prior benefit payment amount. So you can test different potential scenarios to project what might happen. And it's a really great tool to help reassure people about their total increase in income. So starting conversations about work can be intimidating, and knowing what questions to ask and how to respond in different situations are really key skills for caseworkers. So the SOAR Employment Conversation Guide is an excellent tool that can help caseworkers begin those tough but really important conversations. So the purpose is to begin conversations about work with both beneficiaries and those applying for benefits and others to really ensure that the individual is receiving accurate information about employment and returning to work, and to engage with someone to help them determine their work goals. You'll want to provide, the individual with information about employment options, and then provide a warm handoff to an employment support agency if that's not something that you do internally. So this guide was really separated into 3 sections. And the beginning is to start talking about work generally, and the questions include things like, why do you want to work? What kind of work do you want to do? What do you feel are benefits to working? How has not working affected you emotionally, financially, socially? The next section gathers some experiences and skills that the individual could offer the workplace. So some of the questions include, have you tried working in the past? If so, what did you like about working? What challenges caused you to stop working? What are your talents, interests, hobbies? And then the last section is really about future goals and planning. And the questions will include, what are your fears about working or going back to work? What do you need to have in place in order to go back to work? We also have some sample responses in a resource that can illustrate how a conversation about work could progress. And we have some kind of potential responses from individuals to the questions asked, and then suggestions for how you could respond in return. So for example, if you ask someone, how long have you been out of work? And the person answered, well, I left the military 3 years ago and nothing's worked out since then. The sample responses guide suggests that you could respond with, well, can you tell me more about what hasn't worked out? Were there things that you enjoyed doing in the military that you might want to try as a civilian? Have you checked your eligibility for the GI Bill or other education benefits? There might be benefits available to study a trade, go to college, or try something completely new. We could also explore the military skills translator together to brainstorm ideas of jobs your military expertise would be well suited for. And so it gives you kind of an example of how the conversation might go, what resources you could suggest. And the guide has links for all of the resources that were mentioned in the sample scenario. So here's one more example. The question was, how do friends or family feel about you returning to work? And the individual's response, well, my sister told me that I shouldn't go back to work because it might make my illness worse. So the caseworker could respond, well, it sounds like she really cares about you. And many times people think work will make someone's symptoms worse, but the fact is that working is proven to be very helpful in actually reducing symptoms. And it's common for family members to feel concerned about their loved one. Would you like me to share some information about the variety of services and supports that are available? So we really, with this guide and these sample responses, want caseworkers who are new to having these conversations to feel comfortable having them. All right, so this next infographic is one of my favorite tools to encourage work. It just gets straight to the point. Yes, you can work. It is designed to bust myths and encourage employment. The back of the page has resources and information about employment support programs. This is a great one-page handout that you can provide to anyone interested. We also created customizable handouts and cards that community programs can use to add local resources. So these can be full page or wallet size, and there's space for SOAR provider contact information, ticket to work providers, voc rehab, benefits planners, IPS supported employment. There are even more ideas for the larger handout. So use these resources and the others that are going to come from our upcoming presenters to share and encourage employment. Back to you, Pam.
Thanks, Kristen. So we've already had over 20 questions answered by our panelists and TA Center staff. Ray, who's going to be speaking next, has been answering at rapid fire many questions, and many are related to the fear folks have returning to work and getting into some of these work incentives. So Ray is going to really talk about how to access folks in your communities who know all about work incentives, who can allay some of these fears. Ray, take it away.
Thank you so much, Pam, and I'm happy to be here with all of you. I just want to make a note with the answers that I've been giving. They're short answers, and this is a complex issue. We first have to know if you're an SSI recipient or an SSDI recipient, because the work incentives are different. So what I've been putting in there is basic, and I'm trying to do my best, as we get through this stuff. So, I come from the same place that Kristen come from. I believe that everybody has something to sell, and that our jobs are basically to help people do that, find out what it is and sell it to an employer. Work is the only way out of poverty. I've tried for 44 years now to find another way out of poverty. But if you are on public benefits, such as SSI and SNAP, things like that, you will be in poverty. Those systems are meant to keep you in poverty. If you're on SSDI, we have to think about that average benefit this year of, I think it's just around $1,700. That's not a lot of money. And it's only about $50 or $60 above the poverty level. So work is a good thing. Work is a very good thing. Now, in December 17th, 1999, President Clinton signed the Ticket to Work and Work Incentives Improvement Act, otherwise known as the Ticket Act. It was the last bill he signed into law during his second term. The Ticket to Work Act created 3 new providers that can begin providing services to people who are interested in returning to work or starting work for the first time. Now, I'm not going to talk very much about vocational rehabilitation, because state agencies for vocational rehabilitation have always been a player. So when we talk about employment networks, just know that state VR agencies are able to accept tickets to work, or they can just assign them. But it's a good way of getting some added protections if you are working with VR, and they can make a choice. They're going to make a business choice about whether or not they should assign the ticket, or whether or not they are going to want to just put it in use. So let's see, what are these new agencies?
Ray, we're getting just some feedback that your voice is low. If you can just get closer to the mic, that would be great.
I will do my
Thanks.
best. No, it's a rare event that people tell me my voice is low, so I will try to speak up. The employment networks. These are alternatives to state VR agencies. They may be very large organizations. They may cover a state or several states, or they could be very small organizations that cover a certain zip code or a certain city. There is There are about, I think it's about 300 now that function. There were more than that. Some of them weren't taking tickets, so Social Security cut them off, rightly so. But most of the agencies who are serving as employment networks now are doing a very good job. Protection and advocacies for beneficiaries of Social Security. That was my last job before I joined staff at Cornell. And it's kind of the legal wing, of the whole return to work system. Let's say that you were prepared to work, ready to go, and your employer, your prospective employer, asks you an inappropriate question during your interview, denies a request for a reasonable accommodation, you could come to see me as the PABS attorney, and I could represent you or help you negotiate a better outcome. The final one that was created by the Ticket to Work Act is the Work Incentive Planning and Assistance Program. This is the benefits planning group. The benefits planners are great resources for anybody that's thinking about work or about to start work. What they will do is put a plan together for you so that you will know when something will happen in the future. When will your benefits be affected? Where are you in the return to work phases that exist out there? Yeah, and will you have more money when you actually lose benefits? Yeah, that's the goal here, to make sure work pays and that we are receiving whatever we can receive. So, all were created to assist beneficiaries and recipients who want to work in a different style. Each one of these entities, employment networks, state VR, protection and advocacy, and the WIPA programs, could be part of your employment team. Yeah, it sounds a little, what would I need an employment team for? Well, they're all coming at you to offer you services at no charge that are going to help you gain a job. How about maintain that job? Or how about move into a higher paid job or get a promotion? So the employment networks, each of them have a standing agreement with the Social Security Administration to provide rehab and other services to a recipient who wishes to return to work. Now, that could be something like, I need a certificate before I can do the job that I want to do. I need an associate's degree. Depending upon the size of the EN, those may be options for you. Am I all set? I just need a new resume. I need some interview practice, and I need some help finding where the jobs that I want might be. That's another set of services. All of those services serve as an umbrella over all of the work incentives. It's very important to realize that you do not need a ticket to work, and you do not need to use it to get and take advantage of all of the work incentives. The work incentives predated ENs, and lots of people think, well, they have to use a ticket to get those work incentives. That's not the case. When you do sign up to work with an employment network, it's kind of like a triangle. Social Security is paying the employment network for providing you services based on you working and meeting milestones. So the employment network is going to be interviewing you kind of intently. What do you really think about working? Are you really willing to take a job that's not exactly what you want, but it's a job that will get you what you want eventually? I like to tell people that we've all had horrible jobs. you know, but it got us through college. It got me through law school. And it taught me that I don't want to do any of those horrible jobs, but I knew that was going to get me to a good place. We always have to start someplace. But it is a contract, you know, in not a formal contract, but it is an agreement. You are agreeing to reach milestones according to your plan so that the EN is being paid. They will be paid by Social Security. Now, the return to work plan has to be signed and approved by Social Security. You know, they're not really approving it, the quality of the plan. They are looking to see that there is a plan, that it has all of the legal requirements that are out there, that you have been informed of your right to take the ticket back and find another provider, things like that. You know, it's the basis for ensuring that a recipient will make timely progress. When you sign that plan, you're agreeing to make timely progress and advance in accordance with your plan. Yeah, and if that starts falling apart, we're going to have to look at why. You know, are you having an exacerbation right now and you have to stop work for a while or cut back? That's okay. Or have you just said, no more? I choose not to do this. At that point, your ticket may be withdrawn. Now, the services, again, I said they were small agencies and very large agencies. And some of the people that were local are now national. Yeah, I think that the pandemic taught us a lot about doing things virtually. And we can do lots of things virtually. Yeah, and people have learned that, and that has stuck since things reopened. And there's really no harm in doing that. So whether somebody's going to talk to you in person or whether you choose to do that, you know, you can pick an EN accordingly. Okay, the services are not limited, but can include resume preparation, providing job leads, practice interviewing skills. You know, when I look at just those three, I've been working with Cornell now for 25 years. If I had to get a new job, my resume needs to be prepared very differently, and I have no idea how to do that. So I would want my EN to help me do that. Providing job leads, as I said, where are the jobs that I'm looking for? Where in my community, and who is hiring at the moment? And practice interviewing. You know, I learned the hard way that if you don't have questions, when your prospective employer says, do you have any questions for us? You're making a horrible mistake. You know, so a little bit of research. What does this business really do? What are their interests? You know, so that you can ask a meaningful question back to that employer who's been asking you a lot of questions. And this is a big one, how to request reasonable accommodations. You know, lots of people with disabilities who want to work need reasonable accommodations, but they're afraid to ask for them. You know, so maybe the employment network can talk to you about it. Do some role play. You know, how can you get this reasonable accommodation? You know, you don't have to ask for it when you're being interviewed. You can get the job and then ask for it. You know, how about other on-the-job supports? Maybe you'll have a job coach, you know, with you for a while. You know, job coaches usually don't stay around for too long, and they usually diminish over time so that you're used to working on your own. But what if it has to be a little longer? Who's going to provide that services? What does it mean for the employer to have that job coach on the work site? You know, lots of things that you can toss around with your employment network to figure out how best to ask. Now, workforce ENs are a great place. These used to be called one-stops, and I still call them one-stops, but they're located in American job centers. They can also provide services as an employment network. Yeah, and they're really very good places. Yeah, you can go there and use their computers at no charge to put your resume together. You can search for jobs, and they can actually help you with the same way that we discussed a regular EN could. Access to training programs, special programs for youth, and special programs for veterans can be accessed at workforce ENs. They are really very good. Even to the point where if you get laid off after you've been working, you can go back to the American Job Centers, apply for benefits, and then start looking for a new job all in one place. If you're into one-stop shopping, this is a good one for you. Now, PABS, I said, was the legal wing who's supporting a return to work effort. I remember one of my clients had quit his job, and then came in to talk to me about it. And I said, "Why did you do that?" And he had an overpayment, and he thought quitting his job was the best thing to do. Yeah, and I asked him, "When did you do that?" And he said, "This morning." I said, "Okay, do you mind if I call your employer and get that job back now that you know quitting might not have been the best option you had?" And he said, "Go ahead." And I called. I talked to the employer. He made a mistake. He loves the job. He wants to come back. And we saved his job. That was nice and easy. Then we had to deal with the overpayment issue, and we successfully dealt with that. Now, these protection and advocacy agencies are in each U.S. territory and state, and most are named Disability Rights something. Disability Rights California, Disability Rights New York. The agency I worked in Massachusetts was the Disability Law Center. But if you were to put down disability rights and your state name into a Google search, you will find them. And harken back to Kristen's statement about the Choose Work site. It's a great place to start. No obligation. Just find out what's going on, and you can narrow your search to PABs or to ENs or to benefits planners and find your state vocational rehabilitation agency on that site. Great place to start and explore, no charge and no obligation. Now, PABs will provide legal counsel, advice, or representation for recipients who face barriers to work. When I was working as a PABS attorney, I read that very, very broadly. I had people who were being evicted, and clearly you're not going to be focused on work, and you might not be able to maintain your job if you don't have a home. So I saw that as a barrier to work. I saw Social Security overpayments as a barrier to work. Job discrimination, is a barrier to work. Lots of things are barriers to work. And if you have one, contact your PABS office. These services, legal services, including representation in courts or administrative processes, are free of charge for the worker. They are the result of Social Security funding these programs as part of the Ticket to Work Act. Now, I told you there were 57 of them, right? 50 states, 7 territories. Every state's going to use this money a little differently. I'm not even sure if the program I worked in Boston is still doing it the way I did it. But, it was me, one attorney for 3.5 million people in Massachusetts. So they're small programs, but when you can get in there and find out what their priorities are, and you have a priority, you will get services. All right, and now WIPA, the Work Incentive Planning and Assistance. I call them benefits planning agencies because that's what they're doing. They're community-based organizations. Some of them are housed in the state VR agency. Some are at Goodwill, places like that, that work to enable beneficiaries with disabilities to make an informed choice about work and to support working beneficiaries in making that final transition from benefits dependence to financial independence. Now, I said a lot there, make an informed choice. When I do benefits planning work, it's not up to me to put you to work. I give you information. If you don't work, here's your current situation. If you do work for 20 hours at $15 an hour, this is what it's going to look like. And I can tell you it's better. If you work 30 hours, it's even better. I feel that anybody is a success if they're working at their maximum capacity. But I've also had clients who thought about it and who I prepared a plan for, and they said, I'm not ready yet. I gave you an informed choice. So I did my job. I consider my job a success. If you want to reconsider and come on back to me, come on back. We want you to make these decisions knowing what's going to happen, because we don't want you to be reactive. If you don't know what's going to happen to your benefits, you're reacting to a notice from Social Security, a notice from SNAP, a notice from every agency that you have to deal with. If you know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, you are in a proactive position, and that's maintaining your power. And we want everyone to maintain as much of their power as these agencies will allow. Whoops. All right, I moved it, jumped around. There is a WIPA program assigned to each territory, although not always located in that particular state. I'm now in New Mexico. Our benefits planner is via a program in Nevada, and that person lives in Northern California. It does give me some concern that they're so far away, and how many people in New Mexico are actually getting services. But I know that person can deliver services effectively via distance. So it may not be in your state or territory. Work with them anyway. They are all trained by excellent people. I know all of the trainers very well. I worked with them, in fact, for a long time. And they're excellent. They also have ways to make sure that somebody who's not in your state, but is covering your state, knows what the state specifics are for the benefits that you receive, so that they can all be considered. Now, WIPA services are provided also at no cost to the worker or our new worker via Social Security funding. The Ticket to Work Act created and told Social Security how much to use funding. Right now, unfortunately, the funding has been $20 million for 25 years. So we all know what that means. A dollar does not go as far as it did 25 years ago. And WIPA programs have a priority system that's been created by Social Security. If you are working or are self-employed, you are a top priority. If you have a job offer right now, you're a big priority. And there's a priority for transition age youth, 14 to 17. Now, these are all kids who are receiving SSI benefits. And boy, this is an exciting group to work with. You can't help but think you're working with an exciting goal ahead to take a transition-age youth and make them a worker with a disability rather than an SSI recipient. And that can happen pretty fast. Now, the referral priorities, there's a helpline that people generally call, and the WIPA programs get their referrals from that helpline. But the helpline's a triage unit. You know, we're used to that triage word from watching Grey's Anatomy for 20 years. Yeah, it's the emergency. What has to be done now? What can we do for you and get you to the service? Are you working or self-employed full-time? Then your helpline referral will go to WIPA. How about working or self-employed part-time? That's a secondary priority. You know, you had a job interview within 30 days before contacting the helpline, or you have one scheduled within 2 weeks after contact. Or you're seriously considering employment and currently receiving services from VR or an EN. Or you're seeking work incentive information if the WIPA program has capacity. You know, that fifth group, I believe, is one of the most critical groups, and they're last on this priority list. If people can talk to somebody when they're thinking about going to work and find out how it's going to affect their benefits, learn that it is safe to work, learn that there is nowhere other than up for a new worker. They will have more independence, they will have more privacy, and they will have more money while maintaining their health care. Yeah, that's the time to get the advice that you need.
And I think these are amazing resources. And so we have time for other panelists. Ray has already answered like over 20 questions. We've answered about 50 total. So what's great is Ray's slides are here as a resource, and we'll touch on them if we have time at the end. But speaking of self-employment, we are now going to turn it over to Caroline Bullis is going to talk about self-employment and gig work and all entrepreneurship and all that great stuff. Caroline?
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. As Pam said, I was the SOAR state lead for Maryland for a long time. I've been involved with SOAR for since 2010. And it's a bit like the Hotel California. Once you join, you never leave. And I'm delighted that that's the case, because I've really seen the power of what SOAR does. And like Ray and Christine, I always too was talking about the importance of work when I was the SOAR state lead. But when I moved to MDI and started reflecting on it, I realized that I had never really thought about self-employment as a viable option. This was despite the fact I had my own small business, despite the fact that at least 2 of the workplaces I had been in my life had been owned and founded by entrepreneurs with disabilities. But maybe like you, I think often in the space of disability and benefits, thinking about work is always about waged employment and really not thinking around how self-employment can be a viable option as well. So just a bit about NDI, National Disability Institute. We have been around for nearly 20 years, and really our overall mission is to ensure the financial health and well-being for people with disabilities. And we do that through training, technical assistance, policy development. But the small business side is one of our newest arms and has been going for about 3 years. And it really is just recognizing that this can be just a great option for individuals. So in our small team, we support entrepreneurs and small business owners at any point of their life cycle in their business journey. So it can be somebody who just has an idea, maybe not even an idea yet. They just think self-employment is something they would like to do. It can be somebody who has a organization with many employees who is looking to scale even more. So really that whole gamut. A lot of the work we do is around supporting those organisations that support entrepreneurs, because often we find they have not had experience of working with disability. And so they might have loan applications or other applications that are not screen reader friendly for someone who's blind. They don't know how to access sign language interpreters for somebody who needs that, or just generally sort of are anxious about doing the wrong thing and not knowing really how to be inclusive. And then the third part of our work is really why we're here today, working with disability employment service providers to really help us think about self-employment, to put it on the menu, if you like. And that includes also being a vendor for state vocational rehab agencies as they look to expand their self-employment. And we do this through partnerships. We have a great network that we can refer people to, and through amazing resources on our website that I'll share at the end, but really covers so much if people want to think about how self-employment might work for them. So when we think about self-employment, what is it? Again, not one definition, but a really nice simple one is working for oneself rather than working for a specific employer for a salary. So you might hear the term, they're a 1099, which means they are an independent contractor and are self-employed. This is compared to a W-2, which is a waged employee. And when we're thinking about self-employment, it's a way to earn income, but it can be a whole range of activities. It might be you have your own business. An example, we have somebody who kept bees, very, very keen on his bees, and then developed into a business, selling the honey, using the wax to make candles. And so what was a hobby became something that became income generating. It might be somebody who is working remotely. Maybe they are a graphic designer, and they might have more than one client that they will contract for a piece of work. So maybe it would design a logo, and that would be like an 8-week project. It could be somebody on a long-term contract. And then we think about the gig economy, which is huge now. Things like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, really ways that an individual can earn an income much more on their own terms. Choose when they want to work, how much they want to work, and use that technology to do activities. And some of those, again, can be done remotely. Some of them are ones that people physically would go and drive a car. And we're going to hear more about that in a moment. People often ask us, like, how many small businesses are owned by someone with a disability? And the answer is really, we don't truly know, because so many of the federal surveys and data collection methods do not ask that question. They'll ask about race or gender, but they don't ask if the person has a disability. By one estimate, there is 1.8 million disability-owned small businesses, but we know that's going to be a really undercount, just knowing how many people have disabilities and how many small businesses there are. One thing we do know, though, is that people with disabilities are twice as likely to be self-employed as those living with a disability. And sometimes that's for less positive reasons. We had an example of somebody who really wanted to work in a coffee shop and she couldn't even get an interview. They said, oh, you'll be too slow. But they never gave her the chance to even do that. And so with family support, she set up her own coffee business. So again, sometimes it's because the person couldn't find a job to meet their needs, but often it's for very positive reasons. It's for the benefits. And in a moment, we're going to hear from an entrepreneur who's going to talk more about this, but these are just some of the benefits we hear about. It can be much more flexible. You can meet your needs. Maybe you're somebody who, because of your symptoms, finds mornings really challenging, and you do your better work in the evening. If you're self-employed, you can often do that. We have a graphic designer who does all her work in the evenings and just occasionally has to meet a client for like an hour during the day. If you're dealing with a disability, you're often having to navigate a world that really wasn't built for you. And so we see a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, a lot of problem solving. A lot of the things we take for granted, like our closed captioning that we're using today, like the typewriter, speech recognition, have all come from or for the disability community. And so that innovation, finding a niche because you see something isn't there that you need, often then leads to a product that everybody benefits from. A bit like the whole flexible work schedules, being able to design your work environment that really meets your needs. You can choose your lighting. If you're in an office, it's harder if you're in a shared space. If you're self-employed, you have a lot more say on how you want your office to be set up. And then as Ray and Christine, and the whole point of this webinar, it really is a chance to increase income, wealth, and just enhance that financial security. There's also a lot of softer benefits, if you like, rather than just financial. But, it can really lead to an increased self-esteem and confidence. It can build a network. It can definitely build new skills and really help in terms of career. And when we're thinking about self-employment, it doesn't have to be a either or. You can have a job, and then you may decide to do some gig work. That might work for a while, and then you might decide, no, I want to go back to waged employment. It's not a case of you have to choose a path. The skills you build are going to help you. And everybody, will have different needs at different times of their life. And sometimes self-employment is going to be meeting those needs, and other times it might not be the right time for you. And the last thing before I'm going to introduce us to our wonderful entrepreneur is we often hear, oh, well, this person, because of their disability, they can't run their own business. They don't know how to be a bookkeeper or how to market their products. And I would say, as a small business owner in the past, no small business owner knows everything about running a business. And if you do, you're probably not doing what you're there for. You're not creating your product or providing your service. Most small business owners will. They have to hire an accountant or use someone else to do their marketing or have a bookkeeper. But I think often when we have someone with a disability, we hold them to a higher standard and say, oh, they can't do it. And yet there's many natural supports and paid supports that a person can tap into to really help them start and grow their business. So with that, I am delighted to introduce Nina Massey from Nina Expressions. I've been fortunate to work with Nina now for, a couple of years, I think, and just blown away every time I speak with her with all that she's got going on. So Nina, welcome and thank you. And maybe just to start, just tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Nina Massey, and I live in Denver, Colorado. I'm a performance artist, and I have a background in education. I used to be a Montessori teacher before I became disabled. And so after I obtained a disability, I went and got my master's degree in performance art education. And so now I'm starting an art practice that combines both artistic expression and education. And I want to combine healing movement, writing, and poetry for my clients. I'm doing performances and workshops. And I host an annual community gathering that celebrates artistic expression and wellness. So as I've been building this art practice, I've actually been a Lyft driver for the last 5 to 6 years.
A bit more about that. What will be the benefits for you of being the Lyft driver and now building up your art and healing business?
Oh, well, Caroline, a lot of the things you just mentioned are also things that I thought of. A very flexible schedule. One thing that was not mentioned is that there's tax write-offs. So you're actually looking at net income, which is really beneficial as a self-employed person. So as a gig worker, as a driver, I can write off my gas expenses, my insurance, my phone, and that actually helps with those numbers that we were talking about earlier. It's very convenient. I get to meet a lot of interesting people who seem to be very interested in like art and things that I do. And I'm able to keep working even if it's less hours. Like if I'm having a flare or I don't feel well, I don't have to go work 8 hours or call in sick or anything. I just maybe could do 2 hours. or, 3, and it still helps me feel like I'm being a productive person, despite navigating health challenges.
Choose Lyft. Was there a reason? Had you used them yourself, or how did you make that decision?
Yes, actually, I was a Lyft passenger before I was a driver, and it just was very automatic. It's a very friendly platform. I've had really good experiences both as a driver and a passenger. And so, yeah, it just seems like it's a great organization for someone like me.
About your art business, what are some of those future plans? Like, how are you hoping to sort of grow the business?
Well, so what I'd like to do in the future is work individually with people who have mental health issues that may lead to autoimmunity, and do public speaking and performance art workshops for organizations that are very similar to the ones here today. And I'm preparing for an upcoming community gathering that brings everyone together. It'll be September 1st here in Denver. And if anyone's interested in either the gathering or even how to fill out your application, I have a lot of experience with that. I was recently awarded SSDI, and I've worked through the whole thing. So you can email me, and I'd love to answer some of your questions or just tell you about my process.
Yeah, so we've had lots of questions today about can you work, or that people have been told they can't work and apply for benefits. And so maybe just say in the closing out, just a bit about your experience of applying for SSDI and the fact that you were doing your gig work during that time and working on your business.
Right. So when I first started as a Lyft driver, I wasn't really experiencing that much issues with my disability, but as I was driving a lot, they got worse. So that type of work actually did flare my my autoimmunity worse. So then I started, my therapist recommended I apply for SSDI. I got in touch with an independent living facility here in Denver called Atlantis, and they had an online workshop that they would do to show you help you fill out those papers, the disability paperwork. There's tons of different forms. And so they would have these live workshops, and I'd be able to, just be in the live workshop and ask questions. And I also attended a lot of workshops at NDI and through Griffin Hammis, and that really helped me get prepared for the work incentives before I was even awarded. So that just helped me sort of see what was coming up. So I would suggest looking on their websites and looking at webinars and things that they have. They're really helpful. And I was awarded a year after I applied. And I think that one thing that I'd like to offer to people in terms of that experience is that my application was actually sitting there for 8 months before they had even a chance to start on it. And they were very transparent about telling me that. So I applied in February of 2023, and they didn't even look at it till September. But once they started looking at it, they were really more focused on my disability and my ability to function. And so I had a medical exam where they tested me, and I was seen by someone who specializes in musculoskeletal. So he was a doctor that was really very experienced in the kind of illness that I have. And one thing I'd also like to add is that once you find out, once they determine when you became disabled, you get a Medicare 2 years after that. So basically I was determined that I was disabled June of 2022. And so I am now with Medicare starting this month. And that's changed a lot of things. I mean, I'm navigating now how to work with these insurances and how it affects my benefits and everything. So yeah, I'm still learning, but the process, it was very hard, but I would say it's worth it and stick with it.
Thank you, Nina. And I'd love to go on, but I know we have another speaker. We could spend all day just sharing your experiences. But thank you so much for being here today and just sharing that. as Nina said, and we'll finish up, and these are on the slides, we do have a lot of recorded webinars on our website. You can find the links, but we have some specifically around work incentives and reporting income when you're self-employed, which can be different to a wage. So there's some great information if you are thinking about self-employment, but also want to make sure you understand how it will impact your SSI or SSDI. And we have a national convening coming up on November the 20th and 21st. That's going to have some great information. Nina's going to be sharing some more of her stories there as well. And we have recordings from our previous 2 years also on our website. I'm going to skip the other resources because of time, but again, look at the slides and then just say there's great resources out there generally for just if you're thinking of starting a small business, don't know where to start, as well as our website, there's some really great resources from the Small Business Administration, SCORE, SBDCs, and so on, and of course the National TA Centre. But with that, just again, thank you for having me, and I'm going to pass it back over to Pam.
Thanks so much, Nina and Caroline, for that, and sharing the resources on self-employment and allaying a lot of folks' fear and giving a lot of folks out there hope that they can work in a job, self-employment, a mix of both. So it's really exciting. And now we're going to come to Nancy with Search in Houston, and she's going to share how she has these conversations and really tie things together with what she's been able to help folks see with working and such. Nancy, take it away.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to have this conversation from the perspective of a SOAR disability specialist. And when my clients come to me, we have to have a conversation about filing their application for SSI or SSDI, that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and it's going to take a while. And what do they want that time while they're waiting to look like? Are there things they want to do? And oftentimes I'm told that, oh, I can't work. Everybody has told me that I can't work. It's if I'm going to get disability or SSI, I have to prove to them that I can't work. And the best way for me to prove I can't work is to not work. And so we have the conversation about how if they work, when they work, they will have information generated that helps the Social Security Administration or DDS see what they can do, what they can't do, and the kind of accommodations that they need. And that changes and breaks down that myth of, no, I can't work, I can't do anything. My clients that I have worked with have had jobs where vocational rehabilitation has been involved, where Social Security has been involved, but more often than not, it's been things that have organically happened. Like if you meet your clients in public, 2 of my clients work for coffee shops that those owners are having a very difficult time hiring and keeping employees in the climate that we have right now. And both of my clients were approached by the owner or the manager of the shop and said, hey, I noticed that you're friendly. I noticed that you have a nice smile. I noticed that you're here frequently. Would you consider working? And so at that point, the client and I will have a conversation privately about what that looks like for them. And both of these ladies determined that they were very willing to work part-time. And so they gave me permission to work with them in approaching the person that had suggested a position. And we use the 3380, which is the third-party function report, to help design what that looks like. Also, I have had clients that are doing some things that are more self-employment generated. I had a gentleman that was kind of occupying a bay at a car wash, and he had a couple of folks that would regularly come to him. And so we ended up talking with the owner of that car wash to see how they felt about him having specific times that he was there, or specific days that he was there. And that worked out for him. And he actually is building a relationship was building a relationship with one of his clients to help get that 3380 filled out so that Social Security could see with really fresh, true eyes, what the abilities of that client are, what the deficits are, what the, what kind of accommodations that they need, and that, the combination of working a little bit and their benefits from Social Security would elevate their life. My clients are unhoused, homeless, or in a housing program. And so working is really difficult for them if you can't get to a shower or if you can't have fresh, clean clothes. And so as a part of navigating working, we have to figure those things out as well. I have noticed that several of the colleges here in Houston have business incubators. And so my folks that have chosen the path of working for themselves a little bit have been able to get help with keeping track of the money that they're earning. They have built that, those people have helped build a framework, that the SBA has helped build a framework so that my client knows what they need to keep track of and learn some skills in that. I have found that the income is very important to my clients, of course. But what I've also found is that it has helped them become more adapted to society. They don't feel like such a pariah as a homeless person with a disability. They begin to feel like they can make friends. They begin to feel like they can build relationships. And they will come to me and ask questions. What do I say? What do I do? And we role play and we talk about different things. I've had clients that have worked a little bit and stopped working for a little bit and then gone back to work, oftentimes for a different employer. Those records, that information is all wonderful supports to their Social Security claim. And so it works out that the discussion that we have clear in the beginning, that we need to support your claim with as much information as possible, and working helps to do that. At the end of the day, our goal is to establish income, stability, and independence for those that we serve. And oftentimes, that's not just one thing. Oftentimes, that's a multi-system approach. And I find that a little bit of work and collecting the information that you need to support the request that this person needs the supports from Social Security, that helps promote the best life that they can have. I appreciate you having me. I appreciate you letting me share what my experiences are. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. My email is there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks for providing such real life stories and seeing how reaching out to employers in the community and sharing, your time with listening to, your applicants and helping them work while applying for benefits and then after benefits is really wonderful to hear about that. Using that time, the long time waiting for decisions. We see where Nina actually researched opening up her own business and everything during that time, waiting for a decision. So that's really great to educate yourself and, be busy during that wait time. So now it's time for some Q&A. We're going to have all of our panelists come back and camera up and unmute and take some of your questions. Now, we've had over 70 questions already answered by TA Center staff, Ray, and others. So we know we've answered so many questions already, but if you haven't had a chance to pose your question, you can still put that in the Q&A function, and we'll try to get to more questions in the time that we have. But anyway, we've had so many questions that have come out, that have been asked about fear, and trepidation about even thinking about work, let alone going to work and being self-employed. And I just want you all to share from your experience how folks can feel a little bit more at ease about talking to even their family members about work who may think that the symptoms will worsen. and even staff, case managers who may be, no, we can't apply while you're applying because that'll hurt your case. I want to give each of you a chance to kind of respond to these fears that folks have about returning. If we go more into that, maybe Caroline, do you want to start with that?
One of the things is to just really see other people in a similar situation and how much they are thriving. So we have done a series of webinars and are convening. We've had a lot of different entrepreneurs with disabilities really share their stories, and really every type of disability, every type of business, anything, it sort of has been there. And I think that can really help. So I would definitely recommend that looking for those resources to show it is possible. And again, you can sort of show family and friends if they are concerned, which is not surprising. We know how hard it can be to get benefits. And so, of course, people are concerned about potentially losing them. And it is so complex. So I think finding other people who've been in that situation, hearing from them, and then, as Ray has said, definitely getting that benefit counselling. I think that is key. So you really understand your personal situation, how it's going to impact you.
Who else would like to go and just kind of along the same lines, like how you've been able to help folks allay their fears and concerns about returning to work or even trying it out for the first time? Let's see. Oh, go ahead, Nancy, and then Ray too. I see we got Ray back.
My clients, a lot of them suffer from anxiety disorders. And so working in public and having to be professional and some things that they're learning new is overwhelming for them. And so we try to walk through some things prior to ever beginning work that help them deal with anxiety in their everyday life. And just an example, I had a client that, we learned that she had no income. She was trying to go back to work a little bit. And she found that if she put a little salt on her tongue from a little salt packet, that it helped rewire what was going on for her. Well, salt was bad for her because she had high blood pressure. So we had to find some other things. And we discovered that Anna's candy has not an offensive flavor, but a jarring flavor for her. And so it helped her deal with her anxiety. She didn't have to take her anxiety medicine, which she couldn't take and work efficiently. And so simple things like that can sometimes be the fix.
I would just piggyback off what both Caroline and Nancy said. Is that I think finding that support system and someone who can kind of help you through those anxieties and kind of navigate what you're doing. So having a supported employment specialist, or even if it's a case worker or a friend, someone who can say, okay, we have this job that you're thinking about applying for, and kind of walking through it as a civilian, as a non-worker, and like, what is this place that I might be working? What's the environment like? What are the sounds and smells like? How am I getting there? How am I getting home? Doing some of that practice, but doing that practice like with a buddy, with a friend, with someone else who can be there and support you while you are looking at it. And doing a trial run, seeing if you can't volunteer in that place for a little while, practice some of those skills, see if you like doing that type of work. A lot of the stuff that a supported employment specialist might do with someone, I think can be a really helpful way to kind of test the waters, dip your toe in a little bit, like, do I like this environment? Do I like what my tasks would be? I can feel like comfortable here before you're, kind of thrown in and doing the work full time or part-time.
Yeah, a question and a comment from a mom whose a son with autism who's eligible for SSI and SSDI, just started working part-time, and she's afraid he's going to lose his benefits. So that's just one of the many questions and comments that we've had, just that fear. And questions also that folks are concerned about or just found interesting is that whole world of remote work, remote work. Any information about remote work, looking for jobs in a remote setting where you are working from home, for individuals that may have like limitations with social functioning, so working from home would be an option. Is that something you talk about at NDI and employment networks? Will they help you find jobs where you can work from home?
So just to say, working from home remotely absolutely can be a key way of going into self-employment. We have an amazing business. The individual has a number of issues. That means that she really just has to work from home, and yet she has managed to grow extremely large business using her skills as a graphic designer. So definitely, if you enjoy being in IT, a lot of independent contractors, opportunities can be from working at home. Definitely, all the time that you are able to access the internet, there's definitely a lot of opportunities. And that gig work, some of that is just doing a short project for somebody. It might be entering some data into spreadsheets. There's a lot of opportunities. And I know on the SOAR website and the guide, we list different places that you can look to find that type of very short-term gig work that can be done remotely. And I think we put that in the chat earlier, but that I think is a great resource for people to explore.
Great. And Ray, if you're able, to unmute if you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I think that remote work is a wonderful thing. I've been sitting here working remotely now for 25 years, and I absolutely love it. There are certain things you need to think about, but, I get job announcements from people who are looking for agencies who are looking for benefits planners. And I get 2 this week who would accept any benefits planner anywhere in the country. One was an agency in Massachusetts, and somebody that I actually trained in California is applying for that job. So these job opportunities exist. Again, the pandemic taught us all that this can work very successfully, and it should be in the repertoire for any employment network or any benefits planner to discuss remote work.
We also have a question related to the WIPAs. What should you do if you're having a hard time contacting the WIPA program assigned to your state? Ray, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I do want to take it. And it's really a shame because I hear that a lot. And I'm on the program, I'm on the committee that's evaluating the ticket to work. And we heard that a lot from recipients from across the country. I'm the type of guy that's just going to walk down there and get into their office if they're not going to talk to me over the phone. I know that can be hard if it's not in your state or if you live in a very large state, but persistence is important. If they're not returning phone calls, keep making the phone calls. You have a right to be spoken with. You may not meet their priorities, but you have a right to be referred to somebody else who might be able to help. There are many non-WIPA benefits planners out there. In fact, the vast majority are not funded by Social Security. So if one program's not responding to you, try another one. Yeah, I mean, Cornell has over 3,500 benefits planners that we've trained and provide technical assistance to. And drop me a note. I'll find somebody near you who should be able to help you.
Right.
I'd like to second that. After I received my award, I was offered benefits planning through DVR, Employment Network, and also my independent living facilities. So you're right, Ray. I think that there are a lot of different organizations that offer that.
Right. And we have a person adding a comment. As someone who experiences fear as a benefit receiver, I can tell you it is real. However, I got to the point where I got tired of following SSA's rules and restrictions, and because I wanted to move on in my financial stability, I started out part-time, and now full-time in my current role, and it feels wonderful. So that's great.
Congratulations. That's a great story. The fear is real. It's palpable. When I talk with somebody who is just considering work, there is fear. Because even though the benefits paid are very low, people have worked to build a stable environment for themselves with those benefits. And the thought of losing $10 could impact that stability. And that's what we're asking you to do. Take a chance. You know, we know how the system should work. It doesn't always work well. But every time something doesn't work well, I've already told you about WIPA, who could help you figure it out, about PABs, who could potentially challenge what didn't work out. You know, so you have that employment team behind you if you choose to take advantage of it. Yeah, and the fear is going to be replaced with joy. You know, the joy of being out of the house, the joy of not being dependent on Social Security, the joy of not having to tell them when you get married, when you move, you know, every time, every penny that you make, you know, that means independence. The fact that you now have more income means you can participate in your community, you can spend money in your community, and you have choices. You know, so here for that person.
Yeah. So I think this is a good question about, or a comment and a question though. No one else thinks about it. I have someone on Social Security disability. She just graduated college and got a job. If she decides to stop her benefits because she knows she's going to make a decent amount, if something happens later down the line, does she have to start the whole SSI, SSDI process over from the beginning, or can she just start it back up? So goes into the basic work incentives information that this caseworker can get. Where would you steer her to?
The Ticket to Work Act fixed that. You know, for most of my career, people just said, well, if this doesn't work out, what do I have to do? And I would tell them, reapply for benefits. Yeah, and people who have gone through that application process and have waited 3 or 4 years to get those benefits doesn't want to hear that. What do I do for 3 or 4 years while I'm waiting? Yeah, does that mean I have nothing, or those state benefits that are far lower than Social Security? Expedited reinstatement, EXR. Yeah, Social Security is, I believe, the only benefits providing agency that cares about what happens to you after you've been terminated.
Right.
You get terminated from SNAP, you got to reapply. You get terminated from SSI or SSDI, Social Security's door is open to you for 5 years. And if your income drops or stops, they can turn that spigot back on pretty quickly.
Right. Well, I'll go back to the resources that Kristen shared in the beginning. That red book, you know, has a lot of information about the specific work incentives that we really didn't talk about today. That wasn't the purpose of this webinar. But it does talk about the different work incentives for SSI, SSDI, or both. And some of those work incentives, like expedited reinstatement and 1619B that was talked about, so you don't lose your Medicaid, is discussed in this red book. So check that out for some of you that are asking some of these questions. And we are almost out of time, but I wanted to give our panelists an opportunity to share your closing thoughts on maybe some of your key takeaways and what you would want the SOAR community to really know about in terms of talking about work with applicants early and often. Who would like to go first in our closing moments?
One thing I'd like to say as a recipient of SSDI is that the application, it seems like it really does focus on the disability and how you're able to function. There was a question in the Q&A that was like, does the kind of job that you have, that you're working, affect your SSDI application? And I feel like it kind of does, because you know, if you're having upper body mobility problems and you're doing a job that's very intense upper body, that might feel a little incongruent. They didn't ask me, but I just wanted to really say that my experience with that application was very, just felt like it was very intentional towards like, how much are you able to function? Very detailed. So.
And that's why our SOAR trained case managers write what's called a medical summary report, an MSR, with a functional information section, and getting quotes from the applicant and others about the severity of their impairments and how they are not able at times to function in a work setting due to their symptoms, and document that, because that's not in the medical records often. But it is something that we share with DDS to really explain how the symptoms may impact their ability to work at their particular job, which is really helpful. But with that, we are really out of time. I just want to thank all of our panelists, Kristen, Ray, Nancy, Caroline, and Nina, of course, for sharing your experience, with us. We have some wonderful resources on the SOAR website, and within the slides themselves, the panelists all shared some excellent resources that I know are very new to me. Please check those out. You have the contact information for our panelists. Should you want to ask them a specific question, feel free to do so. And also, we have an evaluation at the end of the webinar that you'll be directed to. We ask that you complete the evaluation. And also a chance for you to ask, a couple questions if we're able to put it in the Q&A. So again, we just thank you for your time learning about this important topic of work. And again, look forward to our next webinar in August 15th, on the topic of writing quality MSRs, where we'll focus on that functional information section as well. So anyway, thanks again to all of our panelists for taking the time to create such wonderful presentations, and look forward to seeing you in August on our next webinar. Thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day.